The evening sky melted into hues of orange and rose as the call to prayer echoed faintly across the neighborhood. Ion leaned against the railing of his apartment balcony, his thoughts distant despite the beauty around him. His life had slipped into a quiet, predictable rhythm since moving to Lahore for university, lectures, part-time work, long nights with textbooks, and longer days pretending nothing felt missing. He wasn't sure when the loneliness had become so sharp, only that it had. The city buzzed with energy, yet Ion often felt like a ghost drifting through it. That was until he met Denial. Denial had stepped into his life like a misplaced lyric in a familiar song, unexpected but deeply resonant. He was 18, confident in the way only someone just stepping into adulthood could be. There was a certain defiance in the way he smiled, like he knew the world would try to tame him, and he had no intention of letting it. Ion met him at a mutual friend's small get-together. Nothing extravagant, just tea and music and a terrace strung with fairy lights. They had barely spoken that first evening, but Ion noticed Denial watching him with an intensity that made the air feel thicker. It wasn't bold, just deliberate, curious. And Ion, unused to being seen like that, found himself drawn in. Their next meeting wasn't accidental. Ion had messaged him, casually, though his heart had pounded like he was confessing a crime. He invited Denial over for dinner, saying he had made too much food. A lie, of course. He had spent hours preparing everything, double-checking recipes he already knew, just to keep his hands busy and his nerves calmer. Denial showed up right on time, dressed in a worn denim jacket and eyes that flicked over everything with quiet amusement. The dinner was simple, but they lingered at the table for hours, conversation growing easier, even playful. They talked about books neither of them had read, music they both secretly loved, and the strange way Lahore felt like home and exile all at once. Later, without planning it, without even speaking about it, they lay down together. The fan hummed above them, and the shadows of the streetlights danced on the ceiling. It wasn't rushed, wasn't wild. It was soft and silent and strangely sacred. Ion felt, for the first time in years, like he wasn't alone in his skin. Denial's presence was both thrilling and frightening, a storm wrapped in calm. When morning edged its way through the curtains, Denial got up, dressed quietly, and smiled with a warmth that made Ion ache. "Thanks for dinner," he said, like it hadn't been everything. And then he left. The room felt too big after that. The bed too empty. But Ion didn't regret it. Not the feelings, not the connection, not the risk. Something had shifted inside him. Something undeniable. What began as fascination had tangled itself into something deeper. And now, with Denial gone and the silence pressing in again, Ion realized this wasn't going to be simple. He had opened a door in himself he couldn't close. And whatever came next, he knew it had already begun. The evening sky melted that night in his mind, orange, not because he wanted to relive the intimacy, echoed faintly across the neighborhood. Because it felt like a thread. Ion leaned against the railing of his apartment balcony. Denial's voice, his laugh, thoughts distant the way he leaned in closer when something his life genuinely interested him. Quiet. It predictable rhythm in the corners of Ion's memory, university, refusing to fade. Part-time work passed without a nights with textbooks, no calls, and longer days pretending nothing felt missing. The silence was sharp. He wasn't sure when the loneliness had become so sharp. He told himself only that it had not to overthink. The city buzzed with energy. Was young, yet maybe Ion often felt like it had meant less drifting through it. Maybe he was trying to understand what it all meant. Denial had stepped into his life only deepened the ache inside Ion's chest. Unexpected, he wasn't someone who fell easily. He was 18. He had built careful walls around himself. Only someone just stepping into adulthood in a society there was a barely allowed him to breathe in the way he smiled. Like he knew the world had walked through those walls, like they weren't even no intention of letting it. On the third evening of silence, Ion met him at a mutual friend's small get-together. Hope you're doing okay. Nothing extravagant, no pressure. Just tea and music. Wanted to check in. Strung with fairy lights. He stared at the screen long after the message was sent. They had barely spoken that first evening, watching for the three. Ion noticed Denial watching him with an intensity. Nothing came that made the air feel thicker. Not that it wasn't bold. The next day, deliberate. A brief reply popped up in the middle of Ion's shift at the bookstore. And used to being seen like that, just found been busy, drawn in. Sorry. Their next meeting wasn't warmth in the words. Ion
no
had
hint
messaged
of the
him,
boy who had laid
casually,
so close under
though his heart had
sheets.
pounded like
Ion
he was
reread the
confessing
message
a crime.
several times before
He invited
locking his
Denial
phone
over for
and
dinner,
returning to
saying
work,
he had made
pretending
too
like
much
his
food.
stomach hadn't just
a lie,
followed
of
out.
course.
That
He had
evening,
spent hours
Ion
preparing
wandered
everything.
everything.
He walked
double-checking
aimlessly
recipes
through
he
Liberty
already
Market,
knew,
past
just
the
to keep
street
his hands
vendors
busy
and glowing
and his nerves
stalls,
calmer.
not looking for
Denial
anything
showed
but
up right on
escape.
time,
His mind
dressed
kept
in a
circling
worn
the
denim
same
jacket
thought.
and eyes that
Had he
flicked
misread
over
everything?
with quiet
Was he the
amusement.
only one who had
The dinner
felt
was
something
simple,
real?
but they
Or
lingered at the
had
table for
Denial
hours,
simply chosen not to
conversation
feel it?
growing easier.
When he finally
even
returned
playful.
home,
They
it was
talked about
nearly
books
midnight.
neither of them had read.
He sat on the
Music
floor
they
beside
both
his
secretly
bed,
loved,
leaning
and
against
the
the
strange
wall,
wail of horror
letting
felt
the
like
silence
home
swallow
and
him
exile
whole.
all at once.
That's when his phone rang.
Later,
It
without
was
planning
Denial.
it, without even
Ion
speaking
hesitated
about it,
before
they
answering,
lay down together,
unsure whether
the
to feel
fan hummed
anger
above
or
them,
relief.
and the shadows
Hey,
of the streetlights
Denial
danced
said,
on the
his
ceiling.
voice quieter
It wasn't
than usual.
rushed.
Are
Wasn't
you
wild.
awake?
It
I
was
am
soft
now,
and silent,
Ion replied,
and strangely
trying to keep his
sacred.
tone even.
Ion felt
There was a pause.
for the first time in
I'm
years,
sorry,
like he
Denial
wasn't alone
said.
in his skin.
I should have called
Denial's
sooner.
presence was
I
both
just didn't know how to
thrilling
act
and frightening.
afterward.
A storm
Ion
wrapped in
exhaled
calm.
slowly.
When
You
morning
could have
edged
just
its
said
way
that.
through the curtains,
I know.
Denial got
Denial's
up,
voice
dressed
broke
quietly,
slightly.
and
That
smiled
night,
with a
it meant
warmth
something.
that made Ion
I didn't
ache.
think it would.
Thanks for dinner.
I thought I could
he
keep
said,
it simple, like it
just
hadn't
hanging
been
out.
everything.
But afterward,
And then he left.
everything felt
The
different.
room felt too
and
big
I
after that.
panicked. The bed
Ion
too
leaned his
empty,
head back against
but
the wall.
Ion didn't regret
Eyes
it.
closed.
Not the
You
feelings,
didn't have to disappear.
not the connection, not
I'm
the
not
risk.
good at this.
Something
Denial
had
admitted.
shifted inside him.
Not just whatever
Something
this is.
undeniable.
I mean, being close
what began
to someone,
as fascination
letting anyone
had
in.
tangled itself
Neither
into
of them
something
spoke
deeper.
for a few seconds,
and now,
and then
with
Ion
Denial
asked
gone
gently,
and the silence
"What do you want
pressing
from
in
me
again,
Denial?"
Ion realized
I don't know,
this wasn't
came
going
the
to be
honest
simple.
reply.
He had
But
opened
I
a
know
door
I don't
want
wanna
to
lose whatever
he couldn't
this
close.
is.
And
Ion's
whatever came
chest
next,
tightened.
he
The
knew it had
conflict
already
was
begun.
becoming clearer now.
Denial was still figuring himself out, while Ion already knew the cost of love in a world like theirs. One was still opening his eyes. The other had already been blinded once. You don't have to decide everything right now, Ion said, his voice softer. But if you're here, be here. Don't run. There was another pause. Then Denial said, "Can I come over?" Ion glanced at the clock. It's past midnight. I know. He didn't hesitate this time. Come. When Denial arrived, he looked more vulnerable than Ion had ever seen him. No jacket, just a plain t-shirt and jeans, his hair messy and his expression unsure. He didn't say much. He just walked in, sat down beside Ion on the floor, and rested his head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, no words exchanged, no explanations needed. The silence, for once, didn't hurt. Still, Ion knew this wouldn't be easy. Love wasn't simple for people like them. There would be questions they couldn't answer, fears they couldn't voice out loud, and walls they would keep hitting. But in that moment, with Denial's breath steady beside him, he felt a fragile kind of hope. And sometimes hope was enough to keep going. The days kept falling that night in his mind, not because he wanted to relive the both echoed faintly, but Denial started coming over more often. Ion leaned against the railing of his apartment balcony. He never thoughts distant. The way he leaned closer when something genuinely interested him. Some predictable rhythm side by side, Ion's memory, rolling through their phones, lectures, their legs, part-time passed without a brush of skin, no longer days, no nothing felt missing. Other nights, he wasn't sure when the loneliness music or whether the rain sounded better that it had not to overglass. The city buzzed with Denial connection deepened, maybe without ceremony. Felt maybe like it had meant Ion noticed patterns. Maybe he was trying to understand never stalled the whole night. Denial had explanations linger until the late hours. Sometimes Ion had dozed off on he wasn't someone who felt quietly slip away. He was 18 he had built careful walls in the way only someone just enough to survive in a society, followed by barely allowing him to breathe days until morning. Like he knew the world had walked through those walls. Like he knew that pressure could collapse. On the third evening of Ion met him at a mutual friend's small get-together. Hope you're doing okay. Wanted to believe in Denial's sincerity and music, wanted to check in. Voice inside. He stared at the screen long after the message spoken that first evening. Watching for the vet Ion noticed one Sunday evening with an nothing city was drenched. Not that hour. Soon rain. Not that it wasn't bold. Streets outside deliberate. A brief reply Ion made chai. Ion flipped and used to being seen like that. reading
Just
out
been
lines
busy.
with
Drawn
dramatic
in. Sorry.
flair.
Their next
There was
meeting
no
wasn't
warmth in the
accidental.
words,
Not at the poetry,
Ion
no
had
hint
messaged
that
the
the
boy
boy delivering
delivering
it was
so
such
close
self-important
though his heart
charm.
had pounded
I
like
actually
read
liked
the
the
message
message
several times
denial
before
invited
locking his
denial
phone
in the book
and
beside,
returning to
saying
work.
he had made
Pretending
too
like
much
his
food.
stomach
The
hadn't
truth.
just
A lie,
followed
of
out.
course.
That
evening,
Denial looked at him for a
learning
moment
everything,
and then asked
he walked
double-checking
aimlessly
recipes
through
that
Liberty
were
Mart
lying
New,
to ourselves
past
just
the
to keep
street
his
vendors
hands
busy
free
and his nerves
The
calmer.
spoon
Not
in
looking
his
for
hand
anything
showed up
wasted.
right on time.
His
What
mind
mind
kept
kept
circling
circling
this
denim
same
jacket
thought,
denial
and
says
had he
misread
misread
everything
everything
with
between
was he the
amusement.
only
It
one
doesn't
who
feel
had
real
real
outside
outside
this
this
apartment,
but they
or
lingered at the
out
table
there.
for hours.
Simply
I pretend I'm
conversation
someone else.
growing easier.
When he
I can't
finally
even
returned
stay
home
home
without
they
thinking
talked about
nearly
books
that
and
neither
night.
of them had read.
Ion sat down
across
beside
him,
him,
secretly
bed,
loved,
the warmth
leaning
against
against
the
the
wall,
strange way
forgotten,
Lahore
letting the
felt like
silence
home
swallow
and
I've
exile
lived that way
all at
for
once.
years.
That's when his phone rang.
Later,
It's
without
exhausting.
denial.
Denial
Without
Ion
speaking
hesitated
about it
before
before
they
answering.
lay down together,
unsure whether
the
to feel
sometimes
anger
above
or
that could
relief.
just shut
And
it
the
all off.
shadows
Hey,
of the street light
someone
Niall
danced
said.
on the
His
ceiling.
voice
Normal as a
quieter
lie.
than usual.
Ion said.
Are you
They
awake?
just teach us
I
to wear
snapped
now.
and silent,
Ion replied,
denial leaned
trying to keep
forward.
his tone even.
His fingers
there was
brushing
a
the
pause
edge
at
of
the
the table.
time in
I'm
years.
sorry.
Do you think
Like
this
he
could
wasn't
survive
alone in his
outside?
skin.
I should have
Ion
told
didn't
his
answer
presence
right
was
away.
both
I just didn't know how to
thrilling
act
and
afterward.
frightening.
The
A
assumption
storm
wrapped
exhaled
the
slowly.
eyes that always
When
seemed
morning
to
edged
edges
the
at
way
that.
through the curtains,
He
I
thought
know
of the way
Niall
people
got
changed.
Niall's voice
Dressed
reflected
slightly.
the truth.
And
That
smiled
night
with a
said,
warmth that
I don't
made
know. I
Ion
didn't think
but
it would.
I want to try.
Thanks for dinner.
I thought I could keep it
Denial
simple,
looked down
like it hadn't
just
been
hanging out
everything.
tense.
But after
my
my
brother
would
everything
disown me.
felt
The
different.
room
My
felt
father
too big
might
after that.
actually hit me.
The bed
Ion
too
leaned
was
his
heavy.
head back against
But
the wall.
Ion didn't regret
You
it.
don't have to explain.
Not the
You didn't
feeling,
have to
said
not the
Jared.
connection, not
I'm
the
not
rest.
good at this.
Something
Denial
had
admitted.
shifted inside
With
him.
not just
Whatever
denial
things
didn't speak.
undeniable.
I
But
mean,
the way
being
he
close
rushed
to
across
began
the table and took
fascinating
Ion's
anyone
hand
had
tangled
more
itself.
than words
Neither of them
ever
spoke
could.
for a few seconds.
And yet not all
then
things
with
with
denial
denial
gone.
gone.
Secret
Silence
What do you want from
pressing
me
again.
A few days
Ion
later,
realized
Ion
this
received a
wasn't
message
going to
on
be
his
simple.
unknown number.
He had opened a
know
door
I
to
don't
way
want
from
lose
denial.
whatever
Couldn't
this
close.
is.
This is
And
your
whatever
Ion
came
came
next.
tightened.
His
He
heart
knew
conflict
conflict
was
was
becoming
becoming
clearer
clearer
now.
message again.
Denial
Then
was still figuring
trying
himself
to make
out.
sense of the
While
shock.
Ion
Sudden
already knew
fear
the
that
cost
rose
of
in
love
his
in a
chest.
world like
He
theirs.
didn't respond.
One
Didn't
was
tell
still
denial,
opening his
not
eyes.
yet.
He
The
wasn't
other
sure
had
what it
already
meant,
been blinded
or
once.
if it was just
You
someone
don't have to
playing a
decide
cruel joke.
everything right now.
But that evening,
Ion said,
denial
his
didn't
voice
come.
softer.
Nor the next.
But if you're here,
no
be
calls.
Here. Don't run.
No replies. There was another
Nothing.
pause. Ion
Then
waited until
denial
the silence
said,
felt
"Can I
unbearable.
come over?"
Then called.
Ion glanced
The
at the
phone
clock.
rang twice before
It's past
denial
midnight.
answered.
I
His
know.
voice low and
He didn't
clipped.
hesitate this
I
time.
can't talk right now.
Come.
Is something
When denial
wrong?
arrived,
Ion asked.
he looked more
I'll
vulnerable
call you later.
than Ion had
Denial
ever
said,
seen him.
and ended the call
No
before
jacket,
Ion could
just a
speak
plain
again.
t-shirt and
the
jeans.
emptiness returned.
His hair messy,
sharper
and
than
his expression
before.
unsure.
This time it felt
He
like
didn't
a
say
door
much.
closing. He just
Ion
walked in,
stood by the window
sat down
late into
beside
the night,
Ion on the floor,
watching the lights
and
of
rested
the
his
city
head on his
blink
shoulder.
like distant
They sat like that
stars.
for a long
He had
time.
opened himself to
no
something
words
tender,
exchanged,
something
no
fragile,
explanations needed.
and now he
the
feared
silence
he
for
was
once
watching
didn't
it
slip
hurt.
through his fingers.
Still, Ion
Whatever
knew this
denial
wouldn't
was
be easy.
battling.
He
Love
was
wasn't
battling it
simple for
alone.
people like them.
And Ion
there would be
couldn't
questions
decide
they
if
couldn't
stepping
answer.
back was an act of
Fears
love
they
or
couldn't voice
surrender.
out loud. But
And
he
walls
wasn't
they
ready
would
to let
keep
go.
hitting.
But
Not
in that
yet.
moment,
Not
with
without
Denial's
knowing if the
breath
boy
steady
who had
beside
whispered
him,
truths
he
into
felt
his skin
a
was
fragile
still
kind
somewhere
of hope.
behind that
And
sudden
sometimes
silence.
hope was enough
And
to keep
so,
going. As the night deepened and the rain returned in quiet sheets, Ion made a decision. He would fight for this, even if it meant standing alone for a while. Ion had always believed that love, real love, was something you fought for, not in grand declarations or reckless defiance, but in quiet endurance. The kind of endurance it took to wait, to hope, to keep your heart open when everything told you to close it. So even as denial vanished again into silence, Ion refused to let bitterness settle in. He didn't flood his phone with messages. He didn't demand explanations. He simply waited, his heart bruised but steady. Days blurred into one another, each one heavier than the last. At work, Ion moved through the motions like a ghost, shelving books and forcing polite smiles.
At night, his apartment felt too wide, too quiet. He replayed old conversations, scrolled through their photos, stared at the spot on the couch where Denial used to curl up, half asleep, pretending to watch TV. That absence pulsed like an ache beneath his skin. It wasn't until the fifth night that his phone rang again. Denial. The name lit up on the screen like a sudden breath after drowning. Ion answered instantly. Hello. There was a pause, then a voice, hollow and tired. Can I come over? Ion didn't ask questions. Yes. Denial arrived not long after, soaked from the rain, his face pale and eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, someone who'd been holding something too heavy for too long. Ion stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. They stood in the doorway for a long beat before Denial finally spoke. My brother saw my texts. The ones to you. Ion's chest tightened. What happened? He lost it. Said I was disgusting. Said I was throwing away my future. He told my parents. Ion closed the door gently. Are you safe? Denial gave a tired nod. Physically, yes. Emotionally, I don't know. Ion led him to the couch, handed him a towel, and sat beside him, close but not touching. You don't have to explain. Not if it hurts. But I want to, Denial whispered. Because I don't want to keep hiding from you. Ion stayed quiet, letting him speak in his own time. They said I could fix it. That I just needed to stop seeing you. That it was a phase. My father threatened to send me away, to some relative in Peshawar. Somewhere I'd be watched. Controlled. What did you say? Ion asked. I said I wouldn't stop seeing you. Ion's breath caught. You said that. I did. Denial said, looking at him for the first time. And I think I've lost them. The weight of it hung heavy in the room. Ion reached for his hand, held it firmly. You didn't lose yourself. That matters more. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Denial admitted, his voice cracking. I keep thinking maybe I should have lied. Pretended. It would be easier. Easier doesn't mean better, Ion said. And it doesn't mean true. Denial turned his head away, blinking hard. They said I'd end up alone. That no one would ever really want me if I kept living like this. Ion tightened his grip. They're wrong. You don't know that. I do, he said. Because I want you. I want all of you, your confusion, your courage, even your fear. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be here. Silence wrapped around them again, but this time it felt like shelter, not a void. Outside, the storm eased into a steady drizzle. Denial leaned into Ion's shoulder slowly, as if unsure he still deserved that softness. Ion let him rest there, not speaking, not moving, just holding space for him. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. The night deepened, and still neither of them moved. Finally, Denial spoke. I don't know what the future looks like. Neither do I, Ion replied. But we can find out together. Denial nodded, barely perceptible, and let out a breath that trembled at the edges. Then I'll stay. Tonight, at least. Ion turned, kissed his temple gently, and whispered, Start with one night. We'll figure out the rest. And in that fragile, uncertain promise, something real took root. Something no threat, no fear, no rejection could easily undo. They didn't need answers. Not yet. Just each other.